Hey folks, David here with Lightroom Zen. Today I wanted to go over all of my camera settings for concert photography, videography, and my approach to shooting and why I shoot the way I do. So if you've watched my other videos, I've mentioned that I shoot full manual. The only thing I let the camera do auto is autofocus. I shoot full manual shutter speed, manual aperture, manual ISO, and manual white balance. And the reason I do this is for obviously complete control of the image, but also consistency across a whole concert, a whole set. So the two big things there are auto ISO. A lot of people rely on that and they'll shoot manual shutter and aperture, but they'll let the camera control the ISO. I don't trust that because I've had shows where I get home and there's a really bright image. The subject has tons of light on them, but then my ISO punched up to 1600 or 3200 and gave me unnecessary noise and detail loss. And if you're not aware, these modern cameras, they lose dynamic range as you go up in ISO. So you lose performance and image quality, not just from the noise level, but in dynamic range as well, because this sensor I think is 16 stops of dynamic range at ISO 100. But if you go up even to just 600, you lose, I think, 2 stops of dynamic range. You're down to 14 stops of light. And in a concert where you have such bright lights and such dark shadows, that's a big drop in dynamic range. But they're also ISO invariant sensors in these cameras now. And what that means is it doesn't matter if you shoot at ISO 100 or 400 and then boost up +2 in Lightroom from the 100 to match the 400 ISO, they're going to give you the same exposure. The old DSLR days, a lot of sensors, whatever you shot the ISO on was set. You couldn't change it. But ISO invariant is kind of like how shooting in RAW, you can change white balance. Boosting exposure on these modern cameras is the same as shooting it at a different exposure in body. So if you need to boost it, you can, but it's always better to shoot at a lower ISO to get the widest dynamic range and then boost it in post if you need to. So I shoot at ISO 100 when possible. And because of that, I shoot at a pretty low shutter speed relative to most concert photographers. A lot of people try to boost, 500th of a second, 800th or more to really freeze that moment and get that really sharp image. I really push things down to about the 160, 200th a second shutter speed. And what that does is, other than counteracting my low ISO, it's collecting more light. Obviously, that's pretty intuitive, longer shutter speed, more exposure. But I mean literally collecting more photons on the sensor. The same reason that a long exposure of the Milky Way brings out more and more color in the photo you get, because it's collecting more light hitting the sensor. Getting a 200th or 160th or even down, the lowest I'll go is about 150th of a second on a darker stage or scene. You're just collecting so much more light of what is there. And then if you're shooting, my slowest lens is 2.8, so I'm always wide open. Between all of those exposure settings, I'm able to get enough light and keep my ISO down to get the most dynamic range, which is kind of, to me, one of the most important things to focus on in a concert because there's such high contrast scenes generally. The other thing is I shoot the camera faithful profile on Canon. And obviously a lot of this will be in Canon terms, but it's pretty universal information that you can apply to basically all the brands. Can do all of this these days. If you're on Sony, the Sony neutral profile is really good for skin tones. Standard is pretty good, but it's a little more punchy, a little more saturation and contrast. So I like the faithful or neutral on Sony, and I think Nikon also calls it neutral. And when I import that into Lightroom, I also have my Lightroom set up to not use Adobe Color and instead default to the camera faithful or neutral profile so that my in-body image matches what I see on my computer. And if you've ever been editing in Lightroom, you go from your library grid view to your develop module and the image changes the look when you load it. That's the Adobe Color profile applying. So you want to go back to your camera profile that you use when shooting, and you can set it up in body. I've got mine a little tinted towards magenta instead of green, and that gives a little better skin tones, but I'm using that faithful profile with those adjustments. And to show what I mean here, so here's a before and after using that camera profile, that faithful profile color setting, And this is the in-body image versus my final edit to show I can get most of my look in body and not have to, second guess or guess what the image will look like at the end. So you can see how consistent this approach is, and lets me really do most of the work in body. And so when I get into the editing phase of the workflow, a lot of my work is done for me if the light was good. Autofocus, so that is the one thing I do trust the camera to do automatically, because autofocus is so good these days. But I do one thing different that I haven't seen a lot of people do. So most people are familiar with back button focus, where your shutter is just firing the shutter and not doing your focus. So you press back here to focus and you press here to take the picture. So you can just kind of hold it down and track your subject. Instead, I still use that back button focus, and this is set to eye tracking, but the front here is regular zone focus. So if you have your square on the screen, this will focus on that square, whatever is there, and not do eye focusing. But if I want to eye focus back here, it will do eye focusing with the setting for tracking people. You have sports, people, animals, cars, whatever your camera has. This is set up for people, so it's going to look for an eyeball, and it's going to track that eyeball. But the reason I do this is I'm oftentimes shooting a big group, a lot of performers on stage, and sometimes the person in the front and center, the camera doesn't lock on their eye, and it locks on the eye of the person to the side. And I want the person in the center in focus. So if it does that, I can, instead of using the eye tracking, which is generally the best, I just let go of that back button and I press the shutter button, and instead it's going to focus right there on that center point, which will be what I'm trying to focus on that person. So it gives me full control of the autofocus in both approaches. I can get the single point zone focus, or I can get the eye focusing and let the camera, if there's only one person on stage or one person in the frame, I know the eye focusing is going to be just tack sharp, perfect. And if there's a crowded stage, lots of people in the scene, and the eye tracking thing is kind of bouncing around, not sure who to focus on, that's when I'll use just the zone focus. On the video side of things, I have two modes set up. So I'm always in manual mode for photo and video, and I'm just using the photo video dial to go back and forth. I shoot C-Log 2, which is the same thing I'm shooting this video on the C70. It's the best Canon profile. It's what all of their Netflix approved cinema cameras shoot. And so on the R5 II and the C70, I'm shooting C-Log 2 color profile. And then I'm shooting in, I'll give you the exact specs. For the best quality, my 24 frames per second mode, which is actually 23.98p. If you shoot video, I'm sure you're familiar with that. I'm shooting 4K ultra fine. I don't use 8K. I don't have any use for 8K or RAW. I'm just shooting 4K ultra fine, which is the highest. It's downsampling from 8K to output 4K. I'm shooting 23.98 frames per second and intra high, because I'm shooting in AVC or H.264. I do have H.265 available, the HEVC, but that doesn't have the intra frames. It's more long op only. And if you're in the video world, this all makes sense. If you're not, this is, skip ahead. So I'm shooting the highest frame rate, highest bit rate for the best quality, or not the highest frame rate, highest bit rate in that output for the highest quality. Now, that takes the most data, uses the most space on my memory cards, but generally for concerts, I'm shooting short clips. If I were recording a whole set and I had like a static cam recording from the soundboard, I would probably shoot in long op, because then I don't need, the highest ultra crazy quality. I'm still getting 4K, but for that wide stage shot of a whole show or something, I could go down to a lower bit rate, a lower codec, and still, no one's going to know the difference if they're not seeing the raw files. And then my other mode, I use the custom mode. I go over to C1 and I have it set for my custom setting here. And what this does is it throws it into high frame rate mode, which in layman's terms is slow motion. So this jumps it up to 125th of frames shutter for high frame rate, and it drops it to, it goes into HEVC, so 265 long op, because that gives me that access to the high frame rate on this camera. And the whole reason I do this, instead of just switching up to 1/25th of a second, shooting in a higher frame rate, this changes the frame rate to 120 frames a second. It changes the shutter speed to match that accordingly, the double shutter speed. And the real secret here is it outputs it in slow-mo. So when I import this video file into the computer, to my DaVinci timeline, it's already slowed down to that 50%, that 40, 30%, whatever the math is there, from 24 frames to 120 frames a second. So it does that work for me and I'm getting it as much done as possible in the camera. So if I'm shooting, general clips, I got my 24 frames mode, I'm in there, and then I just press the dial, swap it over, hit record, and I've got slow motion of, a crazy moment on stage, the crowd jumping around, the B-roll shots that you usually want to get in slow-mo. I can do that with one little tap of this, and I'm back over there. And then if I'll go back to my 24 frames, normal speed, tap it and move over there. So that's a great feature on Canon. I'm not sure if the other camera manufacturers have the high frame rate mode for the one-click slow-mo. The only thing you give up with this mode is you don't get audio recording. But if you're shooting slow-mo, you don't need audio anyways. And at a concert, how often are you recording audio scratch? So that is everything for my camera settings, and I think that's a good place to call it. Let me know if you have any questions. Try out shooting at a slower shutter speed. Shoot full manual. Shoot full, white balance, shutter, ISO, aperture, everything manual, and see, if you like the results better. For me, it's a lot easier editing process when everything is consistent. If the stage goes dark, I can adjust the shutter speed on the fly with this dial. That's one thing I'll touch on. This dial is shutter speed, this dial is ISO, and this dial is aperture. So right there, with my thumb and my pointer finger, I can swap through all my settings. If I need to boost my ISO, I can just boom, boom, boom. And I know 3 clicks is 1 stop. 3 clicks of the shutter, 1 stop, either way. But if I want the scene to be dark to match the actual scene, I can just leave my settings alone and continue shooting, and I'll have a consistent, realistic recreation of the moments on stage. And for me, that's just much easier to edit than letting my camera try to account for what's happening and then making adjustments for me. Because again, with the way these sensors work, I can make those adjustments after the fact because I'm shooting in RAW, it's ISO invariant, and I don't have to trust the camera to get it right. Because let's be honest, the only thing these cameras are 100% reliable on these days is, well, not even 100%, but the most reliable thing is their autofocus. Everything else in a concert setting, you have a better eye than the camera. And you can learn to trust your eyes and trust your stability to shoot at a slower shutter speed and really push that light gathering capabilities. And I think you'll find you can get a lot more shots you didn't think you could get without shooting at like 6400 or 12,000 ISO. If you really push your ISO or your shutter speed, especially with an image stabilized lens or an IBIS body, I know I can shoot down to like 1/10 of a second with this combo and it's going to be sharp. Of course, that won't account for motion blur on stage if the performer's moving, but as far as like the camera staying stable, I know I can really push this thing, and that has really transformed my approach in the past couple years. I used to shoot shutter priority mode. I would lock in my shutter speed and let the camera do everything else. And it was such a pain to try to fix things across a song or a set and account for all the camera's calculations. And now shooting it all manual, if there's a mistake, it's my fault and I can learn from it. If the camera makes a mistake, I can try to figure out why did it do that and account for it in the future. Use my exposure compensation, but then other shots will be darker when I want them brighter. So I just stopped trusting the camera and just trust myself. And I really, really love this approach to shooting, and it makes my job easier because my shots are more consistent. So I think that's everything. I've run out of stuff to say. So I appreciate everyone that's been buying the preset system. I've gotten some great feedback, and I'm really proud of that. It's been about 18 years worth of knowledge and work went into that. And I've had some great feedback and really proud of the fact that I've been able to help people. I obviously love doing this. I've been doing this on YouTube for 14 years. A lot of my mid-year videos, those are all gone, but some of my early stuff's still on here. But I've been enjoying coming back to it and sharing stuff with people again. And that's going to continue. I'm going to do some more live editing. I'm going to do raw rescue videos, which was a fun thing I used to do, where I'll take one raw file and edit it from start to finish in a couple different ways, just to go over different approaches and tools and stuff. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Tomorrow, got the House of Blues, our Expandits show. It's going to be a great show, one of my favorite bands of all time. And I'll probably do a full start to finish editing video of that. So check you out then. Thanks for watching.